So when it comes to the three main video game companies, the figureheads for these companies are always sort of assimilated with the company themselves. On Microsoft's side of things, you of course have Slick Phil Spencer, who I will be honest with you guys, I think he has gotten better over 2020 as far as conveying a message and then sticking with this message. Now, whether you agree with the mission statement of the Xbox branded systems not leaving the Xbox One behind or anything like that, that's sort of up to you to interpret, but I do think he does do a good job of at least being honest with the consumer so that you sort of know what to expect with some games. On the other side of the coin, we have Sony and Jim Ryan, who, well, he just seems to be a bit of a liar sometimes. These games are only possible through the power of the PlayStation 5, even though they're coming out on the PlayStation 4 as well. There's been lots of things where he sort of double backed on what he's said throughout 2020, so he's quickly becoming my new Phil Spencer. Jim Ryan, I don't know how I feel about you, buddy. But when it comes to Nintendo, obviously there was a big shift. Reggie Fils-Aimé left the company, and Reggie Fils-Aimé was all over the place, doing interviews, doing PR stuff. You constantly heard from Reggie. Well, Reggie was replaced by someone named Doug Bowser, who, for lack of a better term, has just been absolutely quiet. You never hear anything from this dude, and I think that could be potentially a good thing because you don't get situations where you promise something to consumers and then it doesn't end up happening, or of course you get the Jim Ryan situation where you just say stupid things that don't come to fruition. Well, recently Doug Bowser did a pretty lengthy interview with Polygon.com. Yes, Polygon. They actually ask good questions too, so you know, Polygon, I like to rag on them sometimes, but shout outs to Polygon. This was a very well done interview. I will have a link to it in the description box down below. But there were some interesting topics that were brought up during this that I basically want to cover and share with you guys, including things like Game Pass potentially coming to the Nintendo Switch, the whole Super Mario 3D All-Stars limited availability, and the Nintendo Switch Pro situation. What's going on, guys? I'm RGT85. I survived the snowstorm. There's lots of snow on the ground, but we did not lose power, and that's all I really care about. If this is your first time on the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. But without any further ado, let's talk about this Doug Bowser interview and talk about the more interesting parts of it. So one thing I thought was very interesting was Polygon was asking about COVID related things, because obviously COVID sort of messed up game schedules for a lot of games. And one of the things that Doug Bowser said was something that I have always said about Nintendo of America, but it seems like people don't listen to me for some reason, but I thought this was a very telling statement. He basically said, obviously my responsibilities are for Nintendo of America, which is much more of a sales and marketing function. We are in close contact with our parent company in Japan, understanding any possible impacts on dev cycles and if it would alter at all our release schedule. So right then and there, I think that is very important. I have always said that Nintendo of America doesn't necessarily call all the shots like people like to think they do. They are essentially a sales and marketing hub for Nintendo of Japan. And some people always try to fight me on this situation, and they're like, no, Nintendo of America makes plenty of decisions and they do plenty of things. And it's like, no, they really don't. So to see Doug Bowser actually say this out of his mouth, that basically Nintendo of America is a sales and marketing hub for Nintendo of Japan, I thought was very interesting. Obviously, that's not going to mean a lot to other people who already understood this, but if you were sort of, you know, in the dark about this, I think that's a very telling thing. One of the things that was brought up was the potential of Xbox Game Pass coming to the Nintendo Switch. Now, this, of course, is something that we have talked about a lot. It seems like Microsoft and Nintendo have a very good working relationship. Games like Cuphead and Ori are on the Nintendo Switch, cross-platform play. So it seems like Microsoft is definitely willing to play ball with Nintendo, which, of course, makes sense because Microsoft has no foothold in Japan where Nintendo is very strong. So when asked about the potential of Game Pass coming to the Nintendo Switch, Doug Bowser said the following. The way I would answer that, Russ, is we are always looking at various ways that we can engage our customers right now. We have found that our catalog and the third-party publishing catalog that's available, whether it's through Nintendo Switch Online or through Frontline Game Purchase, has really been allowing us to do that. So essentially what he's saying there is that basically services like the Nintendo Switch Online or just releasing third-party games in a cartridge or a digital download format has been working for Nintendo thus far. Now, obviously, this is sort of a PR answer, which is something you're going to see throughout this conversation, but I do think it is interesting he didn't necessarily completely close the door on it. He could have easily said, you know, we're not working with Microsoft on any sort of Game Pass or Game Pass-like situation for the Nintendo Switch, but that door was really left open. And of course, things like cloud gaming becoming more prevalent on the Nintendo Switch with games like Control and Hitman 3 sort of do open the door for the potential of a cloud-based Game Pass service to come to the Nintendo Switch. It's obviously on mobile devices right now. It would obviously obviously be more of an a la carte sort of thing. I don't think it would be nearly as in-depth as Game Pass is on the Xbox systems or the PC, but definitely an interesting statement. Next up, Polygon asked about Super Mario 3D All-Stars, and more importantly, all of the disappearing things when it comes to Super Mario games in 2021. You, of course, have Super Mario 3D All-Stars going away, you also have the Fire Emblem game going away, and you have Super Mario Bros. 35, the game for Nintendo Switch Online, that is also disappearing. And Doug Bowser said the following: "Yeah, I would use a simple word, celebration. It's just, this is a celebration of Mario's 35th anniversary, and we wanted to celebrate in unique and different ways, and we've done that through games like Super Mario 3D All-Stars, or we'll be doing that through future releases, such as Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury." Then he was pressed more about the limited availability of these games, to which he said, "Yeah, at this point, the decision was really made around the celebration feature and aspect. I can't speak to plans beyond the end of March, so that sort of does leave the door open to a possibility of these games going in a different direction, possibly digital downloads on the Nintendo Switch individually, whereas the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection itself was, of course, just available as a limited time thing to get the bundle all in one." Do I like this decision? No, I still don't like this decision. It still doesn't make sense to me. He does go on to say that Super Mario 3D All-Stars sold very, very well, but it's like, how much is that is just sort of a panic buying situation if you don't have the ability to get this game physically or digitally? Now, lots of people are speculating that, like I said, these games will be available digitally after the fact, but not knowing that, you know, sort of having that looming question over your head, you know, 3 months before the games essentially disappear off both the digital and the physical storefronts is definitely sort of worrying to me. I don't understand this decision, but it is nice to see at least a little clarity and have a little glimmer of hope with it. And the final main point I want to highlight from this interview is, of course, the Nintendo Switch Pro situation. I fully believe that we will see a Nintendo Switch revision in 2021 in some way, shape, or form. I fully believe that this will be a more powerful Nintendo Switch system, nothing like a PlayStation 5 or anything like that, but I definitely think the cards are on the table for this situation to happen. And Polygon thankfully asked about the Nintendo Switch Pro situation, all of the rumors surrounding it, and Doug Bowser actually gave a pretty lengthy response to this, which said the following: "Yeah, a couple thoughts here. There are a few questions in there. Let me just break it down. First, we are always looking at technology, and as we know, technology is constantly evolving and changing, and we're always looking at what is coming to determine how can it enhance and improve the gameplay experience, and whether that's on a current platform or whether that's on a future platform, we're always looking at that. However, we also see right now, and we just talked about it, that the momentum of the Nintendo Switch and the Nintendo Switch Lite in its 4th year is strong. And we fully believe we're changing the trajectory of another typical console life cycle. And we will continue for the foreseeable future to really lean into both of these platforms and the content that comes with it, because it's the symbolic relationship that really makes a difference. And it's why Nintendo Switch is so differentiated. First, the hardware form factor obviously is something that you have a gaming system that you can play as a home console and you can take as a go and play in handheld mode virtually anywhere is unique and remains unique within the industry. But then the way we build games onto the platform and the way partners build games onto the platform is what really matters in the experience that you have when you play. So that's what we'll continue to lean into as we go into really what will be the 5th year of the Nintendo Switch. And as Mr. Furukawa, president of Nintendo of Japan, mentioned in his corporate management policy briefing, we believe we're just at the midway point of this life cycle on the system. So there's a couple interesting things that I want to talk about in this response. Technology is always changing is something that Mr. Bowser said. And when you look at the Tegra chip within the Nintendo Switch system, that technology for that chip is still always changing. You have things like the NVIDIA Shield Pro TV, which utilizes the same chip, just a bit more beefed up and overclocked, that allows for things like upscaling of 4K for things that are not native 4K. And of course, the Nintendo Switch is built around essentially mobile technology. And mobile technology is the fastest technology within the industry as far as advancements are concerned. So I do think that that is a very interesting statement. Now, to me, this whole thing is essentially saying that the Nintendo Switch is not going away as a mainline console, and I don't think anyone is necessarily expecting that, but he doesn't really close the door on a revision. He goes on to say things like you can play it as a home console, you can play it as a portable console, but you can't really do that with the Nintendo Switch Lite because the Nintendo Switch Lite doesn't have a docking ability. I pretty much feel like what he's saying here is that there is not a new Nintendo Switch as in a Nintendo Switch 2, a successor to the Nintendo Switch on the horizon, but he's not closing the door on the Nintendo Switch Pro situation and the fact that a beefed up Nintendo Switch with better specs and more improved technology that will essentially run the same games, including the new games that are coming out for it in potentially a better way, much like we've seen with the 3DS to the new 3DS with games like Hyrule Warriors, is definitely still on the table. You gotta remember, Reggie Fils-Aimé was once asked about the new 3DS and he said, no, it's not happening. I don't know what you're talking about. And then the next day, the new 3DS was actually announced. So obviously, there's a lot of PR spin with this sort of stuff, but I do think Doug gave some interesting answers that were definitely worth talking about and something worth exploring. Now, like I said, I have the full interview in the description box down below. They asked about things like if there were updates for Breath of the Wild 2, Metroid Prime 4, Bayonetta 3. Spoiler alert, he didn't really say anything about it. They asked about theme parks, other things involving Nintendo as well. So make sure you guys go check that out. But I just wanted to highlight the interesting parts of the conversation for me and the conversation pieces that I felt were, you know, obviously the most impactful when it comes to the Nintendo Switch and the Nintendo Switch hardware. So let me know in the comment section down below what you think of this. Do you think these are just sort of standard PR answers, but do you think that there's potentially more to it in the way he answered these questions? I think Doug Bowser's a pretty smart dude because he didn't really, you know, close the door on anything. He left it sort of open to interpretation, and that's what I'm here to do, interpret the things that he said. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Be sure to check out other videos on the channel as well. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.